My name is Grant Winnis. I'm a pastor at First Baptist Church in Hampton Falls, New Hampshire. Today is Monday, April 6th, 2020, and we are in a lockdown. The pastors this week are walking through Holy Week. This is Holy Week, and we're walking through the days of Jesus' last week before he was crucified and resurrected. This being Monday is the day after Palm Sunday. Of course, Sunday would have been a work day for the Jews. It was not the Sabbath. Jesus would have entered into Jerusalem, as Stephen was talking about yesterday, on a donkey. At the end of the day, he went into the temple to look around. It was a work day. It wasn't a Sabbath day. It was a work day. And what he saw displeased him. I imagine he went back home that night and was troubled by what he saw in the temple. Home would not have been in Jerusalem. It was a town called Bethany, about 2 miles east of Jerusalem. It was the same town where Lazarus and Mary and Martha lived. Lazarus was the one who Jesus had raised from the dead. And so I imagine there would have been no shortage of people who would have wanted to house Jesus and his disciples who had witnessed that miracle in that town. Of course, Jerusalem would have been packed full of visitors coming from all over the world. And so Bethany would have been a place where he could get out of Jerusalem and find a quiet place to pray, someplace like this. I imagine that on Monday morning he would have woken up early to spend time with his Father in prayer. I imagine that when he was done, he gathered his disciples together and set out towards Jerusalem with the temple in mind. I imagine there was fire in his bones. I imagine that he had a message that he wanted to bring to the people in Jerusalem. And I imagine that as he set out, the disciples would have sensed that. Well, going along the road, he was hungry. And he looked up ahead and he saw a tree, a fig tree in leaf. Well, that was unusual because that was about 2-3 weeks early. In leaf meant that it was ready to bear figs. And Jesus, being hungry, went over to the tree because he wanted to gather some fruit. What's the glory of a fig tree if it's not figs? It's created to produce figs. And if you go over and it's showing all the signs of producing figs and you want some figs and there's not a fig, it's no good. And so Jesus looks at it and he says, "May you never produce fruit again." I'm standing here in an apple orchard and signs of life are just beginning to emerge. You can see this, I'm not sure if you can see that or not. The leaves and the buds are just starting to come out. But to see a fig tree in leaf at that time would be similar to seeing an apple tree with apples in July or early August, before they're really ready. We'll come back to that in a second. Jesus went on to Jerusalem, and as he's going to Jerusalem, I'm sure that the crowds of people would have gotten thicker and thicker. He gets into the temple itself, and as he's in the temple, he sees the money changers. And a holy zeal for the Lord overcomes him. And he takes a cord of whips, and he chases the people out of the temple, never losing control, always in control, always motivated by love for the Father first, and for the people who were there. It wasn't good for them that they were doing that. And he says to them, the Lord said that my house would be called a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of robbers. Now there's two symbols in these stories. This comes from Mark chapter 11, if you want to look it up. Two symbols. First is the fig tree. Israel, all throughout the Old Testament, was pictured as a fig tree, sometimes as a vineyard, as a planting. And so long as she was faithful to God, the Lord would bless her and she would produce fruit. The second symbol is that of the temple. Of course, Jesus, when he was with his disciples, they looked at the temple and it was massive and they said, look at this building. And Jesus said, destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll rebuild it. And they thought, how can he rebuild this? It's taken 40 years. Of course, you and I know that he was talking about the temple of his body. There's a tone of judgment that is in these two symbols. There's a tone of what should be and what actually is. The tree is meant to bear fruit. And it's not lost on us that we are meant to bear fruit. The fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. I'd encourage you today to look at that passage in Galatians and consider what fruit, if any, you're bearing. Just previous to that, it talks about the fruits of the flesh. In this time of isolation, a lot of the flesh comes out. The good news is that Jesus wants to chase that out. We're also called the temple of the Holy Spirit. Do you not know that you yourselves are the temple of the Holy Spirit within you? You are not your own. You are bought with a price. So glorify God in your bodies. The message today is that Jesus is the Messiah. He's coming to his people. He's coming in judgment to judge sin. He first takes it in himself on the tree so that you and I would be spared the punishment of sin. But he will come again. He'll come again as a king to take his rightful place. I'd encourage us to look at our own lives and consider our fruitfulness. Look at the temple of our body, what's in our hearts. Consider the verses that I've laid out for you in the encouragement today. And let's consider the love and the judgment of the Lord. Grace and peace be with you.